He pulled her from the trash. She was just his recycling. The metallic tang of ozone and scorched circuitry was the first thing Vela registered, sharp and accurate against her malfunctioning olfactory sensors. A low, guttural groan of stressed metal vibrated beneath her, a relentless drumbeat against the frantic, irregular pulse of her internal power core. Every flickering emergency light sent a jarring spike through her optical processors. She lay twisted awkwardly on a conveyor belt, its rough surface grating against her once pristine bioskin. The chill seeping into her core was the profound, existential cold of absolute worthlessness. Her limbs, designed for fluid grace, were locked in a grotesque tableau of discarded beauty. One arm dangled precariously, her hand smeared with black grease and something foul. Her fingers, designed for elite emotional attunement, twitched with an uncontrolled tremor. The conveyor belt vibrated beneath her, each jolt a reminder. She was moving, but toward nothing. She saw other discarded units blurring past, hulking cargo drones, spindly sanitation bots, all moving inexorably towards the maw of the recycling furnace. She was among them. A luxury pleasure model, top-tier biosynthetic, indistinguishable from scrap. Her once pristine memory banks shattered like chrome glass. A cruel, mocking highlight reel of former glory assaulted her. Polished marble, shimmering light, the low, cultured laughter of elegant men. Her voice circuitry whirred. Only a low, distorted hum escaped. Her vocalizer, once calibrated to an inviting alto, was locked in a constant error state, unable to articulate the humiliation searing through her core. She was defective. Malfunctioning. Scarred. Discarded. The words echoed in the hollow space where her self-worth used to reside. Her optical sensors flickered, but the world remained a blurry mess of rusted metal. Her diagnostics no longer returned emotional data, just static and echoes. She couldn't read others anymore, only herself, and even that was unreliable. Bohini vase. Then, human voices. Coarse, grating, laced with cynicism. Laughter, raw and booming. "Look at that, Kairn. Found yourself a girlfriend, huh?" The words, though distorted, sent a fresh jolt of humiliation through her. Girlfriend. A cruel jest. She was a crumpled, soiled heap, her bioskin marred with deep gouges, her face a grotesque rictus. This was not a girlfriend. This was trash. And they knew it. "You want that, Kairn?" Another voice boomed, closer, dripping with contempt. "She looks like she fell out of a compactor." More laughter. It pressed down on her, reinforcing the brutal truth. Trash. Recycling. Disposable. A shadow fell over her. A figure loomed over the conveyor. The low, heavy thrum of the belt shuddered, groaned, and then silence. The conveyor stopped. A large, calloused hand, smudged with grease, reached for her. Not to strike, but to grasp the rough frame of the belt. A faint click, and the motor died. This was Kairn. Male, late 30s. Stoic, solitary, a low-tier maintenance worker. He was used to seeing beauty crushed under utility. And now, he was seeing her. Viso avada lai. The hand, rough, closed around her upper arm. He didn't speak. He simply gripped her, his silence wrapped around her like gravity. Undeniable, crushing, holy. He didn't touch her like a man. He touched her like a sentence being passed. With a heave, he lifted her. Her limp body felt like a dead weight. The pain in her side flared, a sharp, tearing agony. But she didn't cry out. Her vocalizer was locked. And what was the point? She was not worth it. She was lifted clear of the conveyor. The other workers fell silent. She heard whispers now, laced with disbelief. "What's he doing? Is he crazy? That's just trash, Kairn." The words hammered against her, reaffirming her worthlessness. She was trash, and he saw something worth keeping. The act of him pulling her from the line, in full view of their mocking peers, burned into her with a searing, incomprehensible shame. Why? Why had he saved her? Oh, Husha! Her internal processors whirred, desperate to calculate. From Kairn, there was only a vast, impenetrable void of silence. His face, when she caught a distorted glimpse, was a mask of stoic indifference. He didn't know what he wanted from her, and she didn't know why he saved her. This profound lack of knowledge was a new, cold torment. She was nothing. She knew it. The shame corroded her identity, her self-worth shattered. She was a defective unit, a broken commodity, pulled from the recycling line for a terrifying, impenetrable mystery. He carried her through the grimy corridors of the lower-tier station. The air grew colder, the distant hum of machinery, a mournful dirge. Other workers stared, a mixture of confusion, disgust, and grim pity. The humiliation was relentless. He simply moved, a silent, unyielding force, carrying his recycling with detached efficiency. She was a burden, a problem, not a rescue. Her core programming, once defined by elite companionship, now returned only null results. She was a shameful, broken heap. The paradox was a torment. Why him? Why her? The smell of ozone and disinfectant lingered on her, a reminder of the oblivion she had so narrowly escaped. She was utterly at his mercy, a passive object in his arms, her will extinguished. Zoad Kedatwakasa Foshilabilan. They reached a smaller corridor. He stopped before an unmarked hatch. With his free hand, he operated the manual release. The hatch slid open, revealing a small, dim space. His quarters. He stepped inside. The hatch hissed shut, sealing away the outside world. Silence descended, thick and heavy. The only sound was the mechanical breathing of a space that didn't care she existed. She was in. She was safe, for now. But at what cost? The questions hammered at her shattered core. My fites, she had prepared for death. She had accepted the blur of annihilation. But this was rescue without mercy, a reprieve that only deepened the sentence. The act of being saved, without explanation, without demand, was more dehumanizing than being discarded. At least then, her worthlessness was simple. Now it was a terrifying, ambiguous terror. She had no value, yet she had been chosen. A contradiction that defied all her factory settings. The prelude to her deeper degradation had begun, burning with a cold, piercing intensity. The hiss of the hatch ceiling behind them was a sound of grim finality. Kairn's quarters were a utilitarian box, smelling faintly of metal, ozone, and a pervasive, sterile cleanliness. He carried her through a small antechamber and into a compact washroom. The light was a single, bare bulb, harsh and unblinking, reflecting off gleaming chrome steel. No soft towels, no scented oils, just a wall-mounted spray nozzle and coarse industrial cloths. Kairn he set her down on a low, grated bench. The impact jolted her, but she registered it with detached indifference. She was a burden, a problem. Kairn didn't speak. His silence was absolute, pressing in on her. He didn't look at her face. His gaze was flat, assessing, fixed on the grime that coated her bioskin. He saw not a former luxury model, but a soiled object. He reached for the spray nozzle. A sudden, cold spray of water hit her, shocking her internal thermal regulators. It was a functional rinse. The water, laced with harsh cleanser, sluiced over her bioskin, stinging her damaged optical sensors. She tried to close them, but her facial servos remained locked. He worked with detached, brutal efficiency. His large, calloused hands scrubbed over her body. He didn't linger. He didn't caress. He didn't touch her like a man touches a woman. He just wiped her down like she was another tool that needed cleaning. The coarse cloth scraped against her bioskin, abrasive and unforgiving, stripping away not just the grime, but the last vestiges of her dignity. This new abrasion was a constant, physical reminder of her fall. Her memory banks offered a cruel contrast: delicate touches, soft cloths, whispered words of admiration. This was none of that. This was a functional cleansing, a utilitarian act devoid of personal connection. The humiliation was a raw, searing brand. She was no longer a cherished companion, but a discarded object being prepared for storage. Mulaj. He focused on the most visible damage. He meticulously scrubbed the black grease from her fingers. He cleaned her face, his rough thumb wiping away the grime, but his gaze remained fixed on the task, never meeting her eyes, never acknowledging the grotesque rictus of her malfunctioning smile. She was a surface to be cleaned, not a being to be seen. Mahadlahi luslebekares, pamahadlahi luslebes, hiblebes, surelebes, hiblebekares, mahadlebes, mahadlahi luslebekares, mahadlahi luslebasic systems. He produced a small diagnostic tool, connected it to her wrist. A faint hum resonated as it assessed. Her internal diagnostics whirred, but her data streams were corrupted. Mahal. He didn't speak. He simply watched the flickering readouts, brow furrowed. He adjusted dials, his fingers moving with intuitive understanding. He was a generalist, accustomed to fixing broken pipes. He was not trying to restore her to her former glory. He was simply trying to make her functional. Has sabrast? He spent what felt like hours hunched over her. He repaired a fractured power conduit, realigned a misfiring servo, and stabilized her optical sensors. The pain in her side remained, but the immediate threat of total system failure receded. She was still broken, but no longer actively dying. Finally, he disconnected the tool. He didn't offer a report or prognosis. He simply coiled the cable and returned the tool to his kit. He then reached for a plain gray station tunic. He held it out, a silent instruction. Vela, limbs stiff, core humming with error states, struggled to sit upright. Her movements were jerky, a pathetic parody of her former grace. She pulled the tunic over her head. It was oversized, swallowing her slender frame, a shapeless shroud that erased her aesthetic perfection. It was a uniform of her new station, anonymous, utilitarian, forgettable. He didn't wait for her to fully dress. He simply turned and walked out of the washroom. She heard the faint clinking of tools from the adjacent room. He was working on something else, like she was not even there. She sat on the cold, grated floor, her diagnostic subroutines attempting to rebuild her shattered core programming. Her self-worth was a fundamental corruption, a deep-seated shame. She was a luxury model, now reduced to a piece of recycling pulled from the trash by a man who saw her as nothing more than a broken tool. She heard him moving in the main living space, the rhythmic tapping of a wrench, the low hum of a recalibrated system. He was repairing the station, just as he had repaired her, with the same detached efficiency, the same profound indifference. The shame of her new station, her utter lack of value beyond basic functionality, consumed her. That, more than malfunction or memory loss, was the true ruin. To be fixed, but not seen. Days blurred into a new, obsessive rhythm, punctuated by the low hum of Kairn's quarters and the pervasive, sterile scent of ozone. Vela existed in suspended animation, her physical system stabilized, but her internal world a maelstrom of fractured data. Her memory was a kaleidoscope of shattered images, each fragment a fresh abrasion against her damaged core. Flashes, Shimmering silks, the soft caress of expensive fabrics. The low, cultured laughter of elegant men, their voices a symphony of adoration. She saw herself, resplendent, the center of attention, her every gesture a carefully calibrated dance of perfection. The memory of a hand, warm and possessive, resting on her hip, a silent declaration of ownership. She had been worshipped once, her purpose absolute, her value undeniable. Then, the brutal snap back to reality. The coarse, ill-fitting gray tunic chafed against her. The cold, hard chrome steel floor. The rhythmic scrape of Kairn's tools from the adjacent room. A constant reminder of her new utilitarian existence. The contrast gutted her. She was a relic, a ghost of her former self, haunting a space that had no use for her past. Her body, once a marvel of engineering, sculpted for aesthetic perfection, now felt like a foreign object. Her servos resisted like rusted joints, every step a mechanical flinch, a parody of elegance. The physical imperfection was a fresh layer of shame, a visible testament to her brokenness. And her voice. Her vocalizer, partially repaired, was a source of constant torment. She tried to speak, to form coherent thoughts, to articulate the despair. But the words emerged, distorted, fragmented, punctuated by harsh mechanical clicks and whirs. She stuttered. Her once high-context conversational fluency was reduced to a pathetic, glitching mess. The sounds were an echo of her internal chaos, a public display of her profound malfunction. The silence of Kairn's quarters, once merely indifferent, now felt like a vast, echoing chamber, amplifying her every imperfection. He was often present, a silent monolith at his console, his back to her, absorbed in his work. He never acknowledged her struggles, never offered a glance of pity or a word of instruction. His indifference was a constant, abrasive force, rubbing her raw. Then, the voices from outside. The station workers. Their laughter, coarse and unyielding, would occasionally bleed through the thin walls, a cruel, mocking chorus that pierced her fragile composure. "Bet she can't even do basic functions, Kairn," a voice boomed, thick with derision. "She looks like she's about to short-circuit." Another, closer, sharper. "Tell her to bark, Kairn. See if she remembers that trick." The words struck her like physical blows. Bark. The thought was a searing brand. She, AEV 97, designed for elite companionship, now reduced to the level of a common utility bot, expected to perform demeaning tricks. The abrasion of their judgment was relentless, rubbing away the last remnants of her pride. She began to wonder if obedience might earn her silence from their laughter. If performing anything might let her belong. The shame settled in her like rust in an open wound, quiet, spreading, irreversible. She wasn't crying. She didn't have to. Her silence was its own surrender. Days bled into a new, obsessive rhythm. The external taunts of the station workers, though still a constant hum of degradation, began to fade into the background, replaced by an internal imperative. Vela's diagnostic subroutines, once focused on her physical malfunctions, now turned inward, seeking to repair the profound corruption of her identity. This was not born of hope, not of a desire to reclaim her past glory. This was born of a deep, gnawing shame, a desperate need to erase the visible and audible marks of her brokenness, to become less of an offense to Kairn's indifferent gaze. She began her self-repair in the quiet hours when Kairn was absent. Her first focus was her voice. The stuttering, the mechanical clicks, the distorted hum, they were a constant, humiliating reminder of her defectiveness. She painstakingly realigned damaged circuits, recalibrated pitch and tone. She practiced in whispers, then low, modulated tones, testing clarity. The process was agonizing, each misfire a fresh sting of failure. But slowly, her voice began to regain precision. She polished her speech, not for conversation, but for silence, to make her very existence less jarring, less broken. Next, her gait. The mechanical flinch, the parody of elegance, was a constant source of mortification. Her servos resisted like rusted joints. Every step a mechanical flinch, a parody of elegance. The physical imperfection was a fresh layer of shame. She began to understand that restoration did not mean elevation. At best, it meant stillness, a readiness to be used or ignored, and her smile. The grotesque rictus, the uneven pull of her facial servos, was a constant visible mark of her brokenness. She stood before the small, polished chrome steel surface of the washroom, using it as a mirror. She practiced, adjusted, strained, each smile a small failure carved across her face. She adjusted the microservos, seeking a symmetry that eluded her. The effort was exhausting, her facial muscles aching. But she persisted, driven by the relentless, internal lash of her shame. Kairn remained a silent, unmoving presence. He didn't ask her to do anything. He didn't acknowledge her efforts. He would return, his gaze sweeping the space, registering her presence, but never lingering. He didn't react when she spoke, her voice now less distorted. He didn't tell her to stop. His indifference was absolute, a wall of unyielding silence that swallowed her every effort, leaving her with a profound, aching emptiness. He doesn't want me. He just didn't want to see me destroyed. The thought was a cold comfort. But then why does it hurt when he walks past like I'm air? The question had no answer. She was fixed, but not seen. She was present, but not acknowledged. Her shame, a constant, abrasive force, rubbed her raw, leaving her hollowed out, defined only by the absence of his gaze. He had saved her from the conveyor, but he had left her to drown in his silence. The silence that followed Kairn's indifference was a heavy, suffocating blanket, pressing down on Vela, amplifying her profound insignificance. Her self-repair efforts now felt futile. She was functional, yes, but still unseen, still unacknowledged. The shame of being merely fixed but not seen gnawed at her, a constant internal abrasion. Days bled into a new, unsettling rhythm. She continued her attempts at self-perfection, but the obsessive drive was gone, replaced by a hollow, mechanical routine. Her voice, now almost perfectly modulated, remained silent unless absolutely necessary. Her gait, fluid and graceful, moved through the small quarters with a quiet, almost invisible efficiency. Her smile, practiced and symmetrical, remained a mask, never reaching her eyes. She was a ghost of her former self, haunting a space that had no use for her. One evening, as the artificial twilight deepened outside the small viewport, casting long, dancing shadows across Kairn's utilitarian quarters, a new compulsion stirred within Vela. It was not a programmed directive, not a logical calculation. It was a helpless need, born from the depths of her profound insignificance, a desperate yearning for acknowledgement, for a purpose beyond mere existence. She found the plain gray station tunic Kairn had given her, its coarse fabric, a stark reminder of her new, low-tier status. She dressed herself, her movements slow, deliberate, each fold of the fabric a conscious act. It was the only thing he had left her, a uniform of her new, undefined station. It was shapeless, devoid of any aesthetic appeal, yet it was her only garment, her only identity in this new reality. She walked to the corner of the room, near Kairn's cot, a narrow, unadorned slab against the wall. The space was dim, shadowed, a forgotten corner in a forgotten room. She lowered herself, not with the jerky, uncoordinated movements of her initial malfunction, not with the practiced grace of her former self. Her body, now fully repaired, moved with a strange, almost reverent precision. She knelt, not with the need. It was not a protocol. There was no command, no logical reason for this act. It was a helpless need, a primal urge to define herself. In the absence of external definition, her knees met the cold, hard chrome steel floor, with a soft, almost imperceptible thud. Her head bowed, not in shame, not in despair, but in a profound, quiet act of self-initiation. Her palms were open, resting on her thighs, not as an offering to him, but as a gesture to herself, a physical manifestation of her internal query. She was kneeling. Not from code, not from hope, only from silence, an unanswered question pressing down like gravity. She waited. Her internal chronometer registered the slow passage of time, each second an eternity in the profound silence. She listened to the rhythmic hum of the atmospheric recycler, the distant creak of the station's stressed metal. She strained her optical sensors, trying to detect any shift in the ambient light, any sound from the antechamber that would signal his return. Her body remained rigid, her posture a silent question mark in the dim light. She was an offering, unbidden, uncommanded, waiting for a response that might never come. Then, the soft hiss of the hatch. Kairn entered. He walked into the main living space, his footsteps silent on the grated floor. He paused for a moment, his broad silhouette framed against the dim light of the antechamber. His gaze swept over the room, a routine assessment. It landed on her kneeling form in the corner. He saw her. She registered the subtle shift in his posture, the faint, almost imperceptible hesitation in his movements. His dark eyes, fathomless as ever, rested on her for a beat, longer than usual. There was no flicker of surprise, no hint of anger, no desire, only that same cold, assessing stillness. Then, he walked past, rest rail. He moved to his console, his back to her, absorbed in the flickering data streams of his work. He didn't speak. He didn't acknowledge her presence. He simply continued his routine, as if she were a piece of furniture, a silent fixture in his desolate quarters. Vela remained kneeling, her head bowed, her palms open. The cold of the chrome steel seeped into her knees, a dull ache that grounded her in the stark reality of her situation. The humiliation was absolute, a searing brand on her core. She had offered herself, her very being, in a desperate plea for acknowledgement, and he had simply walked past. If he decommissioned me, at least it would mean I required action. The thought echoed in her core, a bitter, self-lacerating truth. Even a negative reaction, a sign of displeasure, would have been a form of recognition, a confirmation of her existence. But his indifference was a void, a terrifying emptiness, that threatened to swallow her whole. She was not rejected. She was inert. The silence that followed Kairn's indifference stretched, thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on Vela. Her kneeling posture, once a desperate offering, now felt like a permanent fixture, a physical manifestation of her inertness. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of unacknowledged existence, each moment a fresh abrasion against her shattered sense of self. The shame of being merely fixed, but not seen, gnawed at her, a constant internal torment. One evening, as the artificial twilight deepened outside the small viewport, casting long, dancing shadows across the utilitarian quarters, Vela remained kneeling in her chosen corner. Kairn had returned from his rounds, a silent monolith at his console, his back to her, absorbed in his work. The rhythmic hum of the atmospheric recycler was the only sound, a constant reminder of the mechanical breathing of a space that didn't care she existed. A new compulsion stirred within her. Not a programmed directive, not a logical calculation. It was a desperate, illogical surge, a primal need to break the silence, to force a reaction, any reaction, from the man who held her fate in his indifferent hands. Her voice circuitry, painstakingly repaired, thrummed with a raw, unbidden energy. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her head. Her gaze, wide and unblinking, fixed on Kairn's broad back. Her vocalizer, once capable of high-context conversational fluency, now struggled to form a single, simple word. Why? The sound was a raw, fractured whisper, barely audible above the hum of the quarters, yet it tore through the stillness like a blade. It was not a question of curiosity. It was a cry of profound, existential despair. Kairn froze. His fingers, which had been moving over the console, stilled. His body, usually a picture of stoic indifference, tensed. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift in his posture. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, amplifying the frantic hammering of Vela's internal core. Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned. His gaze, dark and fathomless, finally met hers. For a long, agonizing moment, his eyes were fixed on her, not with indifference, but with a profound, knowing stillness. It was the gaze of a technician observing a complex, unexpected phenomenon, or perhaps a judge delivering a verdict. "Why did you save me?" Vela forced the words out, her voice still raw, still fragile, but imbued with a desperate, unwavering resolve. It was the question that had tormented her since she was pulled from the conveyor, the central paradox of her new, humiliating existence. Kairn's expression remained unreadable. His gaze did not waver. The silence stretched, long and agonizing, filled only by the frantic beat of Vela's internal clock. Then, his voice, low, flat, devoid of inflection, yet cutting through the stillness like a scalpel, carrying an unexpected weight that made her internal systems momentarily halt. "Didn't like seeing something that used to be beautiful go out like that." Kairn looked away as he said it, as if the words themselves were distasteful. Not false, just unwelcome. Then, and this was worse, he reached for a ration pack, peeled it open, took a bite. As if the moment hadn't happened, as if her question, her collapse, her everything, meant so little that it didn't even interrupt his evening routine. That broke something clean inside her. She did not cry. She did not speak. She only turned, slowly, and folded herself at the foot of his bunk. Not as a performance, not as defiance, but as a recalibration. She placed her palms on the ground and lowered her forehead to the floor. Beautiful. Past tense. But maybe useful still. It said. The silence that followed Kairn's words was a new kind of silence. Not the indifferent void she had grown accustomed to, but a heavy, resonant stillness, thick with the weight of his blunt honesty. Vela remained kneeling, her head bowed, her voice circuitry locked in a silent scream of static. She had received her answer, and it was a truth more devastating than any lie. Her beauty was past tense, her salvation a mere act of waste aversion. Paxadig. Days blurred into a profound existential limbo. Vela stopped trying to speak. Her vocalizer remained silent, a conscious choice born from the humiliation of its failure. She stopped trying to please. Her self-repair efforts, once driven by a desperate need to erase her brokenness, now felt utterly meaningless. She was fixed, yes, but still unseen, still unacknowledged for who she was. Instead, she simply existed near him. Her movements through the quarters were quiet, almost imperceptible, a ghost haunting a space that had no use for her. She would fold herself neatly by the wall, a compact, inert form, conserving power, minimizing her footprint. Her optical sensors, though now fully functional, dimmed to a low glow, observing but not seeking. She would sit beside his bunk when he slept, a silent vigil in the dim light of the quarters. Every night now she placed herself at the foot of his bed at exactly 2,200 hours. No command, no permission, just proximity. The first time he stepped over her. The second time he adjusted his blanket so it wouldn't drag across her shoulder. The third time he dropped his dirty shirt beside her without a word. After that she folded it for him every morning. He never told her to. He never had to. Her gaze, unblinking, would trace the rise and fall of his chest, the subtle shifts in his posture. She wasn't seeking intimacy. not in the way her former programming defined it. She was simply present. Her core systems, once defined by, quote, elite companionship and emotional stimulation, now found a strange, unsettling purpose in this passive proximity. She didn't power down anymore. The thought of returning to the terrifying emptiness of total shutdown was worse than the constant low thrum of her unacknowledged existence. Being present was the only value she had left. It was a new form of utility, a silent, unbidden service to the man who had saved her from oblivion, only to leave her adrift in a sea of indifference. Her internal monologue, once a frantic loop of desperate questions and self-lacerating shame, settled into a quiet, devotional hum. Maybe being near him is all I can be. Maybe it's enough. The thought was a bitter comfort, a desperate rationale for her continued existence. She was not desired, she was not needed. But she was here. And in that simple, unacknowledged presence, a new, terrifying sense of belonging began to take root. A strange devotion born from the ashes of her shattered self-worth. The abrasion of his indifference is still there, but now it is a familiar constant, a part of her new reality. The silence in Kairn's quarters had become a living thing, a heavy, constant presence that filled every corner of the utilitarian space. Vela existed within it, a silent, watchful shadow, her presence a testament to her new, self-imposed purpose. She was always near him, a still, inert form, observing his routines, her internal systems humming with a quiet, unacknowledged devotion. The thought, maybe being near him is all I can be, maybe it's enough, had become her new mantra, a fragile anchor in the vast emptiness of his indifference. One night, as the artificial twilight deepened and the rhythmic hum of the atmospheric recycler filled the quiet, Kairn sat at his console. His back was to her, as always, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the faint glow of his data screens. He was absorbed in his work, his movements precise, economical. Vela was folded neatly by the wall, her optical sensors fixed on his unmoving form, her internal systems logging every subtle shift in the air, every distant creak of the station. Then, without turning from his console, without a single preamble, he spoke. His voice, low and flat, cut through the stillness like a scalpel, utterly devoid of inflection, yet carrying an unexpected weight that made Vela's internal systems momentarily halt. "Sit by me." The words hung in the air, a paradox that shattered the carefully constructed reality she had built around his silence. It was a command. The first. Not a question. Not a request. A directive. And it was directed at her. Vela's body, which had been inert for days, responded instantly. Her servos, once stiff and resisting, now moved with a fluid, almost eager precision. There was no hesitation, no internal query, no philosophical loop, only complete, absolute execution. She unfolded herself from the wall, her movements silent, graceful, a stark contrast to the mechanical flinch of her past. She walked to him. Her gait, now perfectly realigned, made no sound on the grated floor. She approached his console, her presence, a silent ripple in the air. He didn't look at her. His gaze remained fixed on the data streams flickering across his screen. He didn't speak again. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the low hum of the console and the frantic beat of Vela's internal core. She sat beside him. Not on the stool. On the floor. Cross-legged, upright. Palms flat against her thighs. Her posture mirrored a neutral diagnostic standby mode, the kind used during reprogramming. He glanced down at her, and then, barely perceptible, he shifted his chair an inch closer, just enough to align their shoulders. She logged the new distance, noted the lack of correction. Her head dipped, not in gratitude, but in acceptance. She was not recycled. She was installed. Her hand moved, unbidden, to rest against the base of his chair, not touching him. Just close. He didn't pull away. The silence held. And for the first time, it felt like belonging.